Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at, ladies and gents. I am Kura Isagami, and welcome back to class with another episode of my Robattle Studies 101. Now, this time, I'm going to be covering something that I get asked probably more times than any other Robattle 101 that I've covered in the past, whether that be natures, or metals, or how to ascend, or paint something, or even use the power-up chips. This single subject right here is the one that I get asked about more than anything else ever, and that is on team building. How do I put a team together? What parts are considered good? What do I need to look for? How do I make a good team? All these questions and more are asked me almost non-stop about how to actually go about this. And of course, with the language barrier being something that we as Western folks have to kind of cope with, that can make building things a little tricky since you may or may not immediately know what a certain part does or even how to do it right away. So with that being said, let's go ahead and cover all those answers and more with some examples of some go-to teams that you'll see very frequently and breakdowns as to why each one is built the way it is with this episode of the Robattle Studies 101 and this lesson, Team Building, how to find that best fit. Now, before I go any further, I do want to take a moment and actually describe what exactly team building is by definition. And that definition, when I did research on it, is the action or process of causing a group of people or individuals to work together effectively as a team, especially by means of activities and events designed to increase motivation or promote cooperation. Now, this is, of course, the generic and blanket statement to cover what exactly team building is in, say, a workplace. But of course, if you played any kind of RPG or JRPG in the past, regardless of whatever type of game it was, you know exactly what I'm getting at, and this term already is something you are very well versed with that will get you started on the right foot very quickly, no matter if you're a rookie Medarotter or a veteran one alike. Different types of teams also have several different kinds of roles, again, akin to how you build RPGs. You may have your dedicated nukers, your shielders, your healers, supporters, and so on, and so on, and so on. But, with that being said, the charm of Medarot, however, is the fact that you can also mix and match roles, or even what's called multi-class certain bots, so that you can accomplish more roles with a single bot, as long as you can cover for weaknesses elsewhere on the team, which adds for even more flexibility across the board. Now, I have also been asked this a lot, so I do want to take a minute to debunk the theory that there is an ultimate or end-all be-all team. So I'm going to say that and cut that argument short right here and now and say there is no end-all be-all team at all. For every counter, for every build, for every part, every strategy, there is always a hole that you cannot have covered. So the ultimate strategy is not finding ways to cover every single hole in your coverage, but instead to cover for the ones that you can't meet and simply overcome it with what you can meet with your team build. Ultimately, at the end of the day, however, I can give you examples and team builds and ideas all I want, or you can even ask others for their opinions, but it all breaks down exactly to what exactly you want the role to do, what you want that team to do. And this is often the first question that I ask anyone who says, what kind of team should I go for, or how do I use this Medarot in a team? My first question is, how do you want to use them? How are you going to put them in a team? How are you going to coordinate them? And by simply answering these questions, we'll actually answer your own question too as to how exactly you want to put a team together. So the only team I really didn't cover going forward is what I call the generic go-to all-round team, which is basically no real rule or limit to how you want to put that team together. It's more along the case of just what you want to toss together to get through, say, story content or just everyday farming. But if we want to proceed forward with some examples of very popular team builds that you will see not just across the board with general teams, but also especially in competitive meta. The first one on the board that I wanted to cover is Single Shield. Now, this is a very simple, a very effective, and a very all-around solid coverage team. And it is also very flexible in what you choose to do with it. You can generally never go wrong with it with the setup. Just to kind of break down here what this team build is, of course you have my Copper Cross over there, or rather the V1 Copper Cross there on the far left as my dedicated fighter, with his full charge head, a basic rifle for balance coverage on his right arm, and then of course the Ghost Shot for his left, where a lot of his main damage is coming from. The bot in the middle, however, of course, is using Saint Nurse's head for perfect guard as my first 1 to 2 or 4 turn shielder to cover my first and third bots. Right arm is for basic repair for healing any lost HP in battle, and the left arm, of course, is for restoring any parts that do somehow get broken in the middle of battle to extend my survivability. And then bot number 3 over here is kind of a mixed bag in this case, where I chose to focus this one on, say, ailments, which is a very good filler role to make use of if you don't quite know what you want to put in for bot number 3. In this case, she has destroy, which is good for shield breaking and good overall coverage there. Freeze for the right arm, and virus for the left for effective 2-turn stun locking, and a very solid biped leg on top of that too, to help guarantee that she can get to the line as quickly as possible and buy as much time as possible for the defender and cross in order to get to the line and prep their attacks or their skills. Like I said, this team is honestly very effective, flexible, and very simple, and very easy to make, with lots and lots of flexibility on how you want to do it. However, one warning I do want to give you, if you do choose to use a defense skill, as shown here, beware anyone using slip or destroy. That's going to basically go without saying. If making use of a shield skill basically says up at the forefront, beware anyone using this. The next type of team you will see very, very commonly in a lot of high-end meta teams is double shield team. Now, in comparison to the single shield, which of course has one dedicated bot that serves as your shield and your wall to protect against attacks, in this one's more like a pincer bottleneck maneuver. In this case, where you have 2 shielders and then a single dedicated nuker to basically pick off the target at their own pace, since they're going to be too busy working through the shields anyway. In cases like these, you especially want to beware anyone using slip or destroy, as this will very easily and very quickly cripple you if you're not paying attention to how exactly you're going about it. Of course, I've used Copper Cross 2.0 here as my dedicated nuker, but this role can be interchanged for melee or shooting at your own convenience and what you feel is the most the highest need on the field is for your dedicated fighting. Of my 2 shielders, I have Baron Castle here with shoot guard and melee guard, with a pair of fast biped legs and a basic rifle. Now, you're probably wondering with shielders why exactly I use a simple part when I wanted to use them as shields and nothing more. And that's for coverage, because in rare cases where you may not know what your enemy is going to do, or maybe even in cases where shields may not be considered safe, such as, say, someone using destroy, this allows them the opportunity to continue to fight without being completely hindered or bottlenecked by their own role in battle. So in this case, with Baron Castle, he is free to use a basic rifle attack to take pot shots until he decides it's considered safe to use a shield and play his actual role in battle. And same with Vamp Squid over there on the far right with a basic sword to perform the same role, only in melee, to provide better coverage as a main shielder but auxiliary fighter. The third type of team you will see very often is shoot nuking. Now, this one and melee nuking, which comes right after this, are very easily explained. No melee allowed here, very combat mastery from afar, but it's also based on the flexibility in this case. Long-range necessities, again, Copper Cross does show as my dedicated shoot nuker that a lot of my damage will be coming from, and where a lot of my kills will be going to once he is fully charged and ready to go. Bot number 2 is kind of a mixed bag in this case, with a basic rifle, a shoot variant of destroy, and then break, which he can use for heavy punish, and all-around pretty solid balance across the board. And then my third bot, I chose for my flexibility to be a solid defender in this case, using perfect guard, a basic guard shield, and then melee guard. I may have taken a little bit of a gamble with this one to use melee guard, but it ultimately breaks down to what you're looking for and how you choose to fill it and how you choose to put it together. And the reason for that is tying into their legs, since Red Matador's legs have the Hoplite leg ability, which buffs the shoot and melee resist relative to number of defense parts equipped. This ultimately ties him together pretty well as someone who's going to make sure that the first 2 bots, even if a lot of the main damage is going to Copper Cross, that he's going to be minimizing or mitigating as much damage as possible and to help keep those 2 alive long enough that they can take out the potentially dangerous foes or cripple them enough that a shielder may not be as necessary much further on the field or much longer. The variant of this one, as mentioned, is melee nuking, which is another popular team build you will see often. Simply as the variant, it means no shooting here, close range combat mastery only. Once again, this build is particularly very flexible as well within just the one parameter of being no shooting attacks allowed, so very good for, say, EX trials in this case where you have certain modifiers to meet. In this case, Copper Cross instead is donning a melee kit with basic sword and beam sword, and then I have Pure Set Manjiro for my balanced and all-around auxiliary fighter, but then you may notice I also put a ailment fighter in for my bot number 3. Now you're probably going to ask, why exactly is that when the teams are basically the exact same? Well, you're right. You are absolutely correct. They are indeed the exact same, just with one variant. But the difference is to showcase and prove my point on flexibility. So in this case, I chose to use an ailment fighter instead with a support buff. So I have Scorpio's head for Hypercrept, which is the 2 random buffs, a freeze arm, and then a virus arm for 2-turn stun locking to buy Manjiro and Copper Cross that extra time across the board. Now, this also ties to the point, like I mentioned, of flexibility. So say if you wanted to make use of shoot nuking, but say use an ailment fighter, you absolutely could. Or in melee nuking, you can use a defender, much like I used in the last slide. That absolutely works all the same. It ultimately boils down to what you're looking for in the team and how you want to cover for those particular weaknesses or openings that you may not have coverage for, depending on your team build. The next type of popular team you won't see this one actually very, very often. This is going to be a very incredibly rare instance you will ever have to see this one. I'd say only in very rare instances of a couple EX trials in particular where they say no melee or no shooting parts allowed, and that is passive aggression. No combat allowed here, as you see, or at least direct combat anyway, and it has a more dedicated emphasis on survivability across the board. In this case, the better argument to take is if you can't kill your foe or can't overpower them, then outlast them. In this case, with a team across the board, I did luck out putting this one together by using pure sets. But just to kind of explain it briefly, Particle is basically my healer and my tank in this case, between counter and mirror guard, rebirth, super repair, stat cleanse, and so on and so forth. Particle basically speaks for herself for her role in that team. Bad Hacker here serves as the source of my passive aggression, with a mix between shoot trap and melee trap that he can set basically at will, with a very solid mobility across the board with his legs too, to make sure that no one really touches him. And of course, in meta change as well, he can change it for basic virus, which normally can kind of bypass the no melee or shooting allowed, since it's as a meta change form and not going straight into the battle with it. And then last but not least, I have Saisou Gunshi here, which is my supporter and my buffer in this case. Between guard boost, mobile boost, and field control, he basically is there to kind of make bots like Particle and Bad Hacker a lot more difficult to kill or take down, or make them a little bit faster across the board, or even balance them on terrains that they're not so good on at first glance. Like I said, you will not see teams like this very often, except maybe for the occasional troll team than anything else, as more or less a way to say, if I can't kill you outright, I'm not going to bother trying, but instead I'm going to basically watch you take your own self out and just kind of outlast you long enough, for as long as it takes for you to realize I'm not going to be going anywhere with this one. The next team on the board you'll see relatively commonly is mono female. Now, you may notice a lot of the teams in previous were very dominantly male-based, and some of them were even all male, because a good chunk of the percentage is predominantly male bots that you will see in any library. With that being said, I chose to put mono female in its own listing because it is a little tricky to actually put a team together to match the same role and to match the same roles on the field as you would with, say, any other type of team. In this case, mono female teams, however, are of course no male bots allowed. To a degree, this also can include gender N type parts, such as, say, concave or convex, or parallel deuce or spanag manag, as very popular examples of such. Because a good chunk of EX trials who say, for instance, no female bots or no male bots allowed, have actually started getting smart and realize, hey, just to let you know, you can't use gender N parts either, because we found people have been cheesing them with this using high-end gender N parts. But with this, mono-female teams may not focus as heavily on power across the board as, say, a standard team or a mono-male team may. Instead, focus better on survivability and more so on ailments or support buffs than anything else. So while with a mono-female team, you may take just a little bit longer to actually defeat enemies than you may with most standard teams, this team does give you a lot more flexibility to be crafty with your ailments and your support buffs, so that you can keep yourself free of them, but also make it a living nightmare for the opposing team, having to deal with all those negative ailments right off the top, or with ways to remove positive ailments and then inflict them instead. In this team example, I use primarily hardness 10 with Black Beetle legs as my primary fighter in this case. For my ailment fighter, I chose to use the same Scorpio build that you saw previous as my ailment fighter. And then last but not least, for my shielder and tank and my healer, Particle, again, basically speaks for herself, so no real explanation needed there. For the overall most solid coverage that you can get across the board with a mono female team. Now, one other thing to note, like I mentioned, when you're building a mono female team, you don't need to focus on power as heavily. Now, if in the case where you have parts as, say, full charge or laser or pile or so on, and you can use them, by all means, more power to you. But just don't make it a main focus point when you're putting a team together for mono female, because it's going to be a lot harder for you to do so because of the lack of parts that are more readily available, especially in, say, Friend Point Gacha or Fierce Battles for folks that may not have had the greatest of luck in gacha banners that still want to put something together as a conventional team. The last team in this case as well was one that was actually suggested to me by a friend of mine as one that they've actually started seeing more and more commonly, especially in real-time PvP, and that is a team that I basically call all or nothing. In cases like these, you see a lot of them use a lot of high-end parts like Sacrifice, which does very high base damage relative to your HP. So a lot of teams like this will deal a lot of high base damage right from the start, but they are very heavily reliant on the fact that they are going and banking on the fact that they are going to kill you or take out the enemy leader within the first 1 or 2 turns. If they don't do that, they're effectively out of luck, and at that point, it's kind of an easy win if it's someone on the opposing team. But of course, certain parts can actually make this a little easier or a little more difficult for them or you relative to the case in question. Of course, all 3 bots here in this example have Sacrifice arms across the board, so of course you get that high base damage across the board in the first 1 or 2 turns, as long as they stay relatively unscathed, I suppose. Of course, in this case, Anzuto Beetle, however, has a Shoot Boost, which will benefit her and Blossomail very readily, and then the Shape Memory ability to allow for her to restore her arms relatively easily with little support from anyone else on the team. Blossomail probably will be the highest and heaviest hitter of the group here between Destroy, Double Sacrifice, and then of course a meta change form. And then last but not least, Marie Crown, who also can hit just as hard, but of course has First Aid to grant even better survivability across the board, to help keep parts back whenever one does end up getting broken or used in that sacrifice attempt. With a leg ability on top of that, which makes restoring parts even easier than it was before. Like I said, this is a very risky team, all sword, no shield, because of how it is built, so use it at your own risk. Not to say that it's a bad team to use, as, well, you have had reports of people using them in like real-time PvP as a way to end fights quickly, and it is an absolutely great way to do so. But it does pose a lot of risks that you just need to be aware of right up front if you want to use this team effectively. Now, just as some overall thoughts, just to kind of close out here with some of the examples of teams, the general idea is to look ahead and see the enemy lineup, with the exception of PvP and real-time PvP, where they rank you at random once you hit accept and you're ready to go. Story levels, event levels, fierce battles, they will always give you an idea and an enemy lineup of what to expect across the board. They're giving you that option to put that together and put a team together relative to what you see. Take advantage of that, because if you go in blind, you may find you have a completely wrong team to use for a situation, and you're going to get your butt handed to you because you didn't pay attention to the enemy lineup, nor do you have any idea of what to expect. On top of that, some roles are also interchangeable, just kind of like I mentioned before, with, say, using shielders in place of ailment fighters, or ailment fighters in place of shielders, or even trading out a dedicated fighter for one of the two, or even mixing them. Absolutely feel free to do so and experiment. And the best thing, and the biggest charm to Medarot, which helps it stand apart against any other RPG or JRPG out there, is the mix and match mechanic that makes Medarot what it is. So if you can't fit a dedicated role by itself, then multi-class. You make your shielder an auxiliary fighter, make your ailment fighter a temporary healer or a supporter. Mix it up, change it up, get creative with how you want to put a team together. Because at the end of the day, it may look stupid, it may look really, really silly, and trust me, you get to see some really crazy builds, but as long as it works, it's not stupid. If it works, it's guaranteed to work and it's viable. Doesn't matter how silly or how dumb it looks. On top of that, also be mindful when using defenders. I want to take a very special moment to actually cover this one specifically. When you use shields across the board, originally, when the game first launched, you could use a shield and effectively just kind of watch the enemy beat their head against the wall, hoping and praying they get through. But in fairly recent, when they started making changes to the overall gameplay and mechanics, they have started making the enemy AI a little smarter. In this case, where if the enemy cannot safely attack you from afar, they simply will resort to charging Metaforce and then nuking you with it until that shield goes down, as kind of a fallback plan. This can also technically work for you as well, in the reverse, if you find that it's you in that situation. But generally, the idea with shielders is try not to focus on shielders too heavily if there's a way that you can buy yourself those extra turns. In this case, only buy yourself maybe 2 or 3 turns tops, but make sure that within those 2 or 3 turns, you can absolutely, without a doubt, take out that biggest threat on the field that very likely will come to nuke you with a Metaforce when you're not paying attention. EX Trials also are your playground in this case. A lot of people look at EX Trials and say, oh, those aren't for the faint of heart, those are for the veteran and late game players. Not so, because eventually all rookies will find themselves as endgame players too, with higher end teams that know exactly what they're doing and how to do it. EX Trials specifically give you a lot of modifiers and a lot of rules on how to take on certain kinds of fights using certain limits, such as, say, no melee allowed, no shooting allowed, maximum 1 defense part, certain legs allowed only, and so on and so forth, or even overclocked medals on the enemy to really put your skills to the test, in addition to some of the rules and more as described previous. So with that being said, don't be afraid to lose, don't be afraid to try, because I guarantee you, I absolutely guarantee you, in EX Trials you are going to lose. A lot. Anyway, figure it basically like the Dark Souls of Medarot in this case, because those teams hold nothing back. They will not stop for your feelings. They will not stop and say, I'm sorry. They are there purely to make you lose and make you tear your hair out. But take that in stride, practice, and experiment. That is the ultimate key to what the EX Trials are trying to teach you in this case, to kind of help round and hammer in those skills and knowledge on how to build teams and be flexible with teams. And then last but not least, just to say it one final time for the folks in the back that may not have heard me at the beginning, there is no strategy for an end-all be-all ultimate team. They simply do not exist. There is for every build you create, every strategy, every skill across the board, there will always be a counter for it. So at the end of the day, the ultimate strategy in making your best team in this case isn't building one that covers every single weakness there is, because let's be real, that wouldn't make the game fun. In this case, the mastery is making sure that you can cover what bases that you can with the team, and simply compensate for those that you can't by simply making sure that the opponent can't realize that or take advantage of it. But with all this being said, I believe that covers more or less this lesson of the Robattle Studies 101, and I would like to effectively dismiss class in this case. So thanks again for stopping by. If you'd like to know more, you can follow us below on Facebook at the Medarot News Network page or the Metabots Forever communities on Facebook. You can also join us on Discord in the link provided and in the comments below. If you'd like to keep a closer ear to the ground on anything related to Medarot, whether that be my Robattle Studies 101, my weekly episodes, or anything of the like, just to keep an ear to the ground. You can also follow me on Twitter at IsagamIKura, so if you have any questions, feedback, or ideas, or things that you think I should cover with other Robattle Studies 101 episodes, I would absolutely love to hear it. So with that being said, thanks again for stopping by, folks. It's always happy to have you in. Until next time.